In today's episode with guest April Dykman, why April's more scared of having a secure job than running her own business, how April talking to hundreds of entrepreneurs about their biggest regrets helped her find a healthier work-life balance, why building up your FU fund is critical in the early part of your entrepreneurial career, the long process of choosing an educational path for her daughter, and the very unique school she ended up choosing, and why you need to include female marketers in your campaigns to get better results. My name is Henry Bingaman. This is Getting Out of the Machine. April, welcome to Getting Out of the Machine.
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
So I know you a little bit. I think we've run into each other at conferences a couple times, but we never had a real extended conversation. So I know you as like a really good copywriter. You're part of Paris's group, and I know you have some controls out there. But just for me and the audience, can you kind of give us a little background about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a copywriter. I also copy chief for clients and mainly in the health wellness space or like an entrepreneurial space. And yeah, I've been mentored by Paris for the past, I think, 5 or 6 years. I have a control in the mail right now that's doing really well and has been for a few years. So that's the gist of it. Yeah.
So one of the things I think, before people become successful, before they start their careers, you have a lot of objections and fears about kind of starting out on your own. How long have you been writing now?
So I've been, well, if you really want to go back.
How long have you been out on your own as a writer?
I did publish a book in when I was 7 years old, but
wow.
Yeah. No, so I studied journalism. I went into marketing and did a lot of writing, for various companies that way. I struck out on my own about 10 years ago, and it was mostly content writing because I did not know that copywriting existed. So yeah, I've been writing for a living for, we'll say 10 years, but it's truly been a lifelong thing.
Before you struck out on your own, because I think that's the point, there's a lot of artists and people that have business ideas that want to get out there, but they have, I don't know if I can do it because I have kids. I don't know if I can do it because it's not going to be stable income. So what were some of your fears before you started out on your own versus the reality of the challenges you faced?
So I was terrified to leave my job, and I hated my job with a passion of 1,000 fiery suns. I mean, it was, Sunday night would roll around and I was just miserable thinking about having to go. And as much as I hated it, I was also terrified of quitting. So I had made this sort of pact with myself that when I made enough income on the side that could fully replace my salary, I was going to quit. And even then I was scared. And so there's part of me that was just dreaming of that day that I could walk into my boss's office and be like, by 2 weeks notice, I'm out of here. Like, screw this. And at the same time, my stomach hurt walking in there and doing that. So in a lot of ways, it is a leap of faith. But now, once you're on the other side of it, now I'm actually scared to have a day job. So I feel like that's risky because now my entire income is dependent on this company and how the company is doing and what my boss thinks of how I'm doing. And if they decided that doesn't work, or if something happened and the revenue dropped and they looked at my salary and it's, a big one, I feel like I'd be on the chopping block. So it makes me really nervous now to think about putting all of that power with one person. And then if that happens, then what? If you're not doing anything on the side, that's just your entire income that's gone. And so I think it's hard to see when you haven't been on the other side of that. But once you've seen, not only do I feel more secure now, but, things like health insurance and all these things that I worried about. Yes, it's expensive. It's not a fun expense, but I can always increase my income, which I couldn't do in a job. You basically have to go in and say like, well, I did a really good job. Would you like to give me some more money now? And then they're like, no, or, whatever they decide, and that's it. Whereas I don't feel that way now. If I need to make more money for something, I feel like that's something, that I'm capable of doing fairly easily. So yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think a lot of people it is interesting being on one side and then the other. So before, I had the same thing. I recently just dropped my copywriting clients, like all of them. And that was a big leap of faith in some ways, is because, now it's all on me. Now I have to be my sole source of income. But I think once you have the skill of copywriting, you can always go back and get another client. Like, there's always going to be somebody willing to pay you. So I think building up that skill set is really valuable, no matter what you decide to do with it. So even if you're in a job now and you want to start, being an artist, a graphic designer, a copywriter, you can start building the skills like you did. And then you have a way to make money, even if you get fired. So I like that approach.
Yeah.
one of the things we were talking about offline is kind of work-life balance. So you said you work like 20 hours a week now, is that right?
Yeah, about 20 to 25.
So
Yeah.
how do you kind of approach your work-life balance, I guess is the way to say it, but how do you manage your time around work versus time around family?
So for me, it was a lot harder until I became a parent. And once I became a parent, I had very strict boundaries that I just won't cross. And I think a lot of that is because when I was starting off on my own, I worked for the Mixergy podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with that. But they interview entrepreneurs, mostly like startup Silicon Valley types. And so part of what I would do was this pre-interview process where I would talk to the person, we'd kind of go over what they're going to discuss, all of these things. And over again, I would hear the regret that they threw their entire, everything they had into their business, and now they were divorced. Or, all these years went by and then they realized it, but those years are lost with your kids. Like you can't get that back. That's great that you make that realization and that they turn it around, but there's no going back and changing that. And I just heard that so many times. And I remember thinking before I had kids, before, this was even a big concern for me, I will never make that mistake. And so when my daughter came, that was it. Like my schedule revolves around her. And honestly, it's been the best thing for my business because it forced me to hold boundaries that I was not good at holding on my own. And as a result, I lost any clients that didn't respect those boundaries and filled those spaces much easier than I thought. And you get a lot more respect from the clients that, are understanding and are willing to work with you. And so it's another one of those things where, you're on the other side of it and you're like, why did I not do this all along? Everything is better this way. But it took, having a child and not being willing to compromise on that. Because if my family is, in our kitchen, they're having dinner and I'm here working, that to me is not acceptable. That's not something I will ever do. It is a line I can't cross. It makes me feel terrible. And so I think that's a lot of it is just thinking about all of those entrepreneurs and their regret and their voices and what happened to their family life because they were so oriented toward work and so focused on the work.
So what does your schedule look like then? Like how did you set up the boundaries with the client? Because I think one of my fears was always, oh, if I tell the client I can't do this, they'll just dump me and I won't be able to find a new one. But I mean, a lot of times clients very much respect. They're like, oh, okay, you're a serious person. We're going to let you have that boundary. But how do you set up your day and how did you communicate that to your clients that these are the hours you can get me?
Yeah. So, like I said, it's basically around her schedule. So right now, when she was a newborn, that's just chaos. That's just like, let's take it one day to the next. Now she has been in pre-K. And so my schedule revolves around when I need to pick her up, or, if it's a day my husband's picking her up, then I work a little bit later. And then about 4:30, I just call it quits. One thing that I did have to do was stop taking on launches because it's just too chaotic. And there are too many things that need to be done at the last minute that doesn't work for me. I don't want to do those things on the weekend. That's another boundary for me is the weekend. Now I say that I do now work for a client who I copy chief for them. They do lots of launches and they are the most organized company I have ever worked with. They do not expect anybody to work on off hours. Their launches are a breeze. It's kind of crazy, like how early the copy is ready, ahead of the launch so that it's not crazy. So they are my one exception, but for the most part, I did have to swear off certain types of work like that because, it's not necessarily the client's fault. That's just kind of how most launches go. So yeah. And I think, at the time I didn't have any clients that were too intrusive. I did have one and it just turned out it's just not a good fit. I was taking my kid home from her little music class. They have those toddler music classes. And I'm getting texts from the client about some project and it's something that can wait until Monday. And at a certain point, it just kind of made me angry. And so I had no problem letting that client go. And it's, like I said, it's always scary to do it, but that space always can get filled. And I think that's the hard thing to remember when you're in the moment is that you will find another client. They're not the only one.
Hey guys, it's Henry cutting in really quick. If you're enjoying this episode, I have another video I think you'll really love, especially if you're interested in copywriting. In 2019, the legendary copywriter Clayton Makepeace invited me to speak at his financial copywriting intensive. And he wanted me to talk about how I come up with my big ideas for copywriting promotions. So I boiled the process down to just 8 steps, 8 questions really, to ask yourself to take a weak idea and turn it into a monster that does $1 million, $10 million, or even $100 million in revenue. You can get that talk by going to henryb.co/idea. Once you sign up for my email list, you'll get that talk and a whole lot more goodies. Again, that's henryb.co/idea. All right, let's get back to the show. I'm curious because I was actually just having this conversation with another copywriter that's not happy with one of his clients, and he's trying to figure out a way to politely break up with them. So what do you have a process down for dumping clients? Because it can be a nerve-wracking thing.
Yeah, it can. And it depends on the client. So I've had some, there was one client who he was a great guy. I met him in a mastermind. I still like the guy. He was an absolute control freak to the point where it was like, why don't you just write the copy yourself? Because that's basically what you're doing. And nothing. And he admitted this, that he had not had luck working with copywriters in the past because he's very, so, in an instance like that, it was just kind of a mutual thing. Be like, hey, like, I feel like you want more control over this and blah, blah, blah. There have been others that, there was one client that was basically wanting me to rip off copy of this other product that was exactly like his. And he was like, no, I want it like that. And I'm like, well, we're doing these things. It's got some similar, no, I want it like that. And I was like, so you just really want me to, and I just returned his money. And it wasn't the best ending. It wasn't terrible, but I just said, I'm going to refund you. If you want part of the copy or what's already been done, then we can negotiate that. And he was like, no, just refund me. So I refund him. And then I had already revoked his permissions from the Google Doc. So he emails me and he was like, I see that you already revoked permissions from the Google Doc. I'm like, if you don't want my copy, why are you in there, man? So there, it's kind of on a case by case basis, but I think the main thing is just being honest and also not saying too much. I tend to, in my head, want to explain a lot, but I feel it's better if you just keep it kind of short, like, hey, I really feel this isn't working out. Let's, part ways and whatever makes sense, whether it's refunding them for something or, I'm at a point where it's not worth it to me to try and keep that money. If you can just make the problem go away, that's more of my approach, is just make it all go away as easily as possible. And be fine with refunding them. And that's where it's, I think I've heard it called a fuck you fund, where you have the money stored, set aside to where you can turn down a project and refund them, and it's not going to kill you. And that's extremely important when you're talking about letting go of clients.
One of the things I've seen is that a lot of entrepreneurs that kind of live on the edge are always nervous. Like they always spend all the money that comes in and they never feel secure and they never feel safe. And then there's a lot of, entrepreneurs and copywriters that set aside 6 months or a year of money that they can just live on. So they always know it, they have the freedom. And it really is a very freeing feeling to just have the money in the bank that you don't need the client.
Exactly. Because then that gives you the upper hand. You don't have to, basically do whatever somebody else wants just because you can't afford not to. Now you have the upper hand. You can let that client go and you can go find a better client instead of continuing on with this person. You find a better client and life is just better all around.
So speaking of finding clients, right now you have enough of a reputation that people are coming to you, I'm sure. But in the beginning, that's another big barrier for people, I think, getting out of their corporate job or whatever is like, well, where do I get my first client? So where did you get your first client?
So my very first client wasn't a copywriting client because I wasn't doing that yet. It was a blog called Get Rich Slowly. And it was a blog that I read because I was interested in personal finance. I didn't really grow up knowing anything about personal finance. And so I'm trying to learn this as, a young adult. And the owner of the blog had a call for guest writers. And so I thought, well, I can do that. And so I answered that. And I ended up becoming a regular writer on the blog. So that was my first client. And it was a great gig. And I learned so much from it. It just got to a point where I was like, I can't talk about budgeting anymore. I have nothing left to say. I have nothing to give these people. And so at that point, there was also another company that saw my writing there and contacted me in that. And so it's been a lot of that, more so than me pounding the pavement and sending cold emails, which I think is fine. And it works for a lot of people. It's just not, how I went about it. It was more just word of mouth and being, I think, in the right place at the right time, doing things like masterminds. That has been, I think masterminds is probably where the vast majority of my income as a copywriter has come from.
Yeah, I feel I'm not necessarily masterminds, but live events, anywhere you
Yes.
get the right group of people together. So, my
Right.
first clients came from AWAI, just being at their live events early on. And then also just tapping your own personal network. Like my dad, one of my first big clients, it was like $1,500 or something, but that was a big project for me at the time.
Yeah.
And it was just a friend of my dad's that, he had a supplement that he was trying to sell. And I was like, well, I just went through a copywriting course. I can help you do that. Basically just ripped off an old John Carlton letter and tried to make it work.
Yeah.
And it didn't, but it got me some momentum and it got me noticed. And then it is funny, once you start building that momentum, you get your first, even if it's just a blog post or something, you get paid to write content and it just leads to more and more things.
Yeah.
And I think
that's huge. That the paying gig is huge.
Yeah, the first time it changes your life. First time somebody gives you money to put words on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Actually, so you do a type of you do a lot of direct mail stuff, don't you still?
With Paris, yes.
Can you talk about, because I think a lot of copywriters and businesses, they think all of their marketing has to be in, the new digital online world. And I started copywriting in 2008. So I was just coming into like those real long, ugly sales page letters that were posted on the internet, and all the direct mail clients were transitioning over because it's like, oh, I can email this list for free over and over again to this thing that doesn't cost any money to send. But there's still, I was watching a Dan Kennedy video and he was talking about the amounts of money people are missing by not doing direct mail. So can you kind of talk about how you do direct mail or the difference between direct mail and online?
Yeah. So I'm only really doing direct mail through one client, which is like part of my agreement with Paris. And so I wouldn't say I have vast experience with it. It's this particular client, but it is it's definitely not something to ignore because it does bring in a lot of income. The majority of the money I make is coming from the mailed pieces versus some of the online stuff. I mean, it varies and it depends, but yeah, I mean, I think for the right product, for sure, it's untapped. I don't see a lot of people using it right now because online, Facebook, Google, all of that is the majority of what people think about. I don't know. It's kind of I'm trying to think like, the examples of what I mean. I mean, like the ones that I have done have been in the supplement space. And that is done really, really well. As far as the differences with, if you're talking about doing something in print, it really needs to be something with some staying power. A lot of what I see newer copywriters doing are things that will work very briefly, and it may work amazingly for a very brief amount of time, but it's not something that has staying power. So there's not enough depth in it for it to be one of those, controls that you hear about that ran for 10 years or whatever it is. Those are more about like something new, something catchy, and getting it out there as quickly as possible. Whereas the direct mail needs to be a much more like thought out process. It takes a lot longer for us to get something to the point where it's ready for direct mail. It's not going to be a fast turnaround kind of thing.
Right, but once you have a control in direct mail, it does tend to run for years. I only have one control on the online space that lasted longer than like 6 months, a year. Like it's such a short, especially in financial and a little bit in health. I do have one health control that's been running since 2017, and that's great.
Wow, yeah.
But for everything else, I've done promos that did $10 million, $20 million, but they did it in 4 months.
Yeah.
On 2 launches. You just can't. Yeah, it's just it's more of an asset when you have a mail piece that works.
Yeah. Yeah. It's harder to get there. It's a lot more work. For sure. When I first heard about, royalties and making royalties off something for years, you're like, yeah, like who wouldn't want that? And then you don't quite realize what it takes to actually get something that's doing that will run for that long. So they're just so different, like the two types of marketing.
There's also less restrictions in what you can say. I mean, you still have to follow the FTC guidelines on advertising, but Google and Facebook changed their terms on what you can do. Like try doing a weight loss letter without being able to show before and after pictures.
Yeah.
It's a pain. You can do it, but it's a pain. But in the offline world, you can mail people whatever you want.
Right. Yeah. I mean, within, as long as it's following, the law, you really can. Whereas with the platforms, you're beholden to their changes. And, something that's doing really well could just be like totally shut down the next day because of some arbitrary rule change. So yeah, that's a really good point.
So speaking of following the law, there's a lot of clients that we've both seen or worked with at some points that they technically follow the law, but they're not necessarily being ethical about it. How do you kind of select clients that you believe in that are going to follow what your kind of morals and ethics?
Yeah. So luckily the work that I do with Paris, that's built in because he is extremely conservative on following the law and the rules and what we can say, and they err on the side of caution. Whereas there are other companies that are willing to take more risk with that and just kind of roll the dice and see what happens. So any work that I do with him, that's just built in because he's the acting copy chief on that, which is really nice. So I don't have to worry about, I don't have to worry about that there. The other side of it is really just taking on clients that I feel like I really believe in what they do. It's something that, I would do or I would take myself, which like the supplement that I have in the mail, I actually have bought that for my parents because I do believe in that. There are, of course, other supplements that no, I would never like. So it has to be something that I truly believe in, that I would take myself if it makes sense to, if, the product is like geared toward me. And sometimes, you find out a little bit later on. And then again, it comes down to like just kind of having to exit that relationship. Fortunately, between the work I do with Paris and the work I do with my other main client, the other client has a value system that they follow to the letter. And so that's been really nice as well, that it's not something I have to worry about. We don't do any marketing tricks. There's no like silly, like, I don't know, like sent from my iPhone at the bottom of our autoresponder. Like we just don't do stuff like that. So yeah, it's another one of those things that's tough though, because sometimes you don't know until you get into it. It's definitely awkward to have to push back, but just like with that client that I mentioned, where I'm not comfortable ripping off somebody's copy, it just had to say, this isn't working. Here's your deposit back. Let's part ways.
I've gone through a kind of a journey on this because when I grew up fairly not poor, but not well off. And one of the first things I wanted to do was just make money. And so I was taking on basically anybody that would pay me and not really worrying too much about the ethics of it. And then I had one client was making called a male enhancement supplement. And they just showed me a list of ingredients. They're like, all right, what would you put in this? I'm like, I'm the copywriter. Shouldn't you be talking to a doctor? And so I kind of started being more and more like, I have to find clients that are more ethical than that.
Yeah.
But it's a journey, especially when you're starting out, because, you need the money sometimes. So it's balancing money and ethics is hard for a lot of people. And I think you build a reputation though, when you become known as the copywriter that just won't do that crap.
Right. And I think sometimes even, I don't know if there was a point where, because I have trouble sleeping at night if I do something that, I don't think was the right thing to do. But like I said, sometimes you get into it and then you start to realize you got into it and then they're asking you to help formulate this product. And you're like, wait a minute, like, this isn't what I thought. Like, sometimes it just takes enough of like getting in those situations before you start to get that, kind of sixth sense that like, this doesn't seem right.
But then so you mentioned like the sent from my iPhone stuff. I don't really find that too objectionable. It's kind of a gimmick, but it's not, I wouldn't. It's
not horrible, but to me, it's silly.
A lot of it is, yeah.
Yeah. It's just kind of, I'm like, can't we do better than this? Like, can't we, I feel like we can come up with some more compelling reasons for them to read. But yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes there'll be like, so when I do a big video or something, a lot of times we recorded it, a month ago and it's going live right now type thing. Mm-hmm. So is that, I mean, it's kind of, everybody has to find their own lines, because that I'm perfectly comfortable with. If we're showing I'm about to sit down with blah, blah, blah celebrity tomorrow at noon or whatever your launch date is, but it's pre-recorded. So some of that stuff doesn't bother me, but I guess everybody just has to kind of define their own, as long as it's all legal, right? Find your own morality.
I don't think that that's terrible. The fear for me would be if something happened that somehow the jig was up, that wasn't true. Like, I don't know, like maybe something in the news or something going on with the other person that you're interviewing. And that's always where my mind goes, as just like a super anxious, paranoid person. That like, what if something happens and it's very clearly obvious that wasn't, so I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything that the consumer won't be that mad about if they find out about, I'm comfortable with.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So if they
No,
find
that's
out, oh
fair.
wait, that wasn't really sent from his iPhone, I don't think
Right.
they're going to be too.
And to an extent, like the founder that I'm working for as a copy chief, we have a team of copywriters, and these emails are coming from him. He clearly is not writing all these emails. He can't. Like, that's why he has a copy team. So, to an extent, there are going to be things like that where, yes, he's signing off on the email. He read it, but he didn't write it, because that's not possible. Like, he can't grow a business as big as it is, writing every single email.
Yeah, and part of all marketing is being entertaining and creating an experience for the viewer or reader to go through. So some of those theatrical elements, I don't think they don't bother me at all, and they're actually necessary to make the sale. Because if you say, "Hi, my name is April. I'm writing on behalf of blah 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 client," they're just gonna be like, "What? This is weird."
Yeah.
They don't have to see how all the sausage is made.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I think the main thing is this product something that this person really needs, and is it a good product, and is it something you would give to your own mom or recommend to your own mom? I think that's what matters more.
So I want to switch lanes a little bit. One of the things when we were emailing is you decided not to send your daughter to the public school system, I believe. And for a lot of people, that's a very hard choice. The public schools, you're already paying for it with your taxes. It's the easiest option. But when, I've done a whole episode on schooling, and the schooling system is just not good for so many different reasons. So how did you kind of think about, how did you approach that topic of educating your daughter?
Yeah. So I'm so excited to talk about this, because I feel like she's entering kindergarten, and this has actually been a multi-year journey trying to find the right answer. And so I've done a lot of reading, like different books on different education systems. There's been so many school tours, so many talking with other parents in my community, trying to get the inside track. And I feel like I've done all of this work, and like it should go somewhere. And so when you said you wanted to talk about this, I was very excited. So yeah, I always knew that I didn't want her to go to a public school. And it's a tough thing to talk about, because I do believe in a free and public education. I don't like the system that we have here in our country currently. I feel like we should pay for every child to be educated, but my mom was also, she had a decades-long career in the public school system. So I also saw where administration would kind of get bloated, where it would be like this sort of this, at least in her district, this buddy system where somebody wasn't really a good principal, but we didn't want to fire him. So we're going to make him principal's buddy, and he gets 6 figures a year. So I feel like there's a lot that needs to be done with rethinking how these funds are spent at school, so that they go toward the children and not, but ultimately, I didn't feel like this was something that I was going to be able to change from within. And that's the common argument that I hear, is that, well, you're not helping if you're not sending them to that school. Like, you should send them there and try and change. And I'm like, explain to me how I'm going to end all standardized testing. Explain to me, like, for me, the entire system is wrong. And that's not something I'm going to be able to turn upside down as a parent who is working, like trying to raise a kid.
Right. And you're not going to sacrifice your own kids to making the system better.
That's it too. Yeah. So we started a couple of years ago. Like I said, I started reading, I started looking into options. Our daughter is bilingual, and Spanish is extremely important to us because it's a heritage language. So the first school I looked at is an immersion school that went up through 8th grade, this private school with the tuition is just crazy. And we're just thinking, we're going to figure out how to make this work. And then I started talking to some parents who had kids there, and found out it's really a traditional school. It's just a private school, but it's still, the teacher stands at the front. They still lecture. They're going to give you a test. You basically regurgitate whatever they said to you on the test. And I was like, well, that doesn't work. So we looked at other schools. We kept kind of running into the same thing where, like, yes, it's a private school, but it's really not all that different. And yeah, it's been like a really tough journey, I would say, to get to where we are. It's also a hard thing to talk to other parents about, because if their kids are going to public school, then clearly you can't talk to them about everything you think is wrong. But, I listened to your episode on your public school education experience, and mine was so similar. And I couldn't sign my kid up for 12 years of that. Like, that kind of just broke my heart a little bit to think about. We also looked at homeschooling, which I think is a great option for me. I kind of wanted her to have that peer group that she could go. And to me as a kid, that was important. And so I really wanted her to have that. So I haven't ruled that out. We kind of have to see how things go. But yeah, so the school we ended up on it's based on the Finnish model. They go 4 days a week. Everything is project based. There's a lot of they create an individual plan for your child. So if your kid is ahead in certain subjects, then they will meet them there so that they can keep going, and they can do it because they have such a small classroom. If they're behind, then they can make a plan for that, to catch them up. And we haven't been there, so I can't tell you if it's been a smashing success yet, because we don't start until the fall. But yeah, I feel like my answer to this is so like all over the place, but that's kind of what this journey was like in trying to find a school. It's just all over the place.
Yeah, there's so many options that aren't real options or aren't good options out there. Like you can pay $60,000 a year to send your kids to what amounts to a public school, but just for rich kids.
Exactly. And that's what I kept running into. Yeah. Same problems, really. That first school I looked at, one of the moms that I talked to told me about this experience. There was a bully in the classroom, a child that did some like pretty disturbing stuff, not to her kid, or her kid was not the target or the main target. And I just remember thinking, the tuition there was like $24,000 a year, and they hit you up for even more donations, which we probably would not have been able, that would have been amazing if we could have even covered it. But I just remember thinking like, wait a minute, like you're gonna pay $24,000 a year and still have the same issues that you think you're paying that much money so that you don't have them. But yeah, and it was also really tricky. I would say for anybody that's looking for another school, a lot of schools will tell you that they're going to come up with an individualized program for your kid. That is a huge selling point. Every school we talked to said that they did that. And then I would talk to parents in the school and find out that that was not necessarily the case. So that's a very tricky thing too, is that they tell you a lot of things you want to hear to get you to enroll. But yeah.
There's a private school system that I actually invested in as an angel investor called Dexter. It's out in Texas. They focus on what they call Walmart communities. So it's more rural. It's where the Walmart's kind of the center of the community. So it's not high income kids necessarily, but they group kids by basically ability level. So you might have an 8th grader working with a 5th grader on their computer programming class, and then a 6th grader working with the 9th grader in their literature class, just depending on where they are. And so it bases by individual activities. And then you have more, so they get the best teachers, and then they film the lessons, and then they just have a teacher's aides in there to help kids if they have any questions. So they're going out and trying to find the best curriculum possible and the best person to teach it. And then just have their teachers are just teaching aides. They're there to just support the kids, help answer questions, but not necessarily do the lesson planning themselves. And I really like that model. It seems to make a whole lot more sense because it is just based on the individual kid. But you mentioned homeschooling. My sister has 7 kids now, and she homeschools them.
Wow.
And there's a lot of homeschool groups. So the kids do have a peer network, and they also have a good community in their church.
I think that, and especially so I live in Austin, and there's a huge homeschool community here. And so I don't believe in the whole your kid's never gonna not gonna have friends and they're not gonna have playmates. I think for me, the difference though, was that I remember as a kid, and I've always been, I guess, kind of, I don't know, as a kid, I felt like an adult, I guess is the best way to explain that. And I liked having my peer group that I went to and saw and every day. And it was sort of like my own life away from my parents. We had what was going on with us. And to me, it was different than if it had been at my daughter's age, a play date or joining a soccer team. And those things are wonderful. But I really wanted to see if I could find something. And honestly, if this school hadn't worked out, I was already looking at homeschool options. Like, how do we make this work? What do we do? We just happened to find a school that we loved and my daughter fell in love with. So, but similar to what you were talking about, there's another school system called Acton Academy. And that is another one that we considered it. My daughter just fell in love with this other school before we toured that one. But Acton Academy, instead of having teachers, they have guides, and the students during their individual work period are working on badges. And so they decide, oh, I want to work on math today. And so they could be like really ahead in math, like if they love math, but maybe they're behind in reading. And at these schools, that's okay. They will eventually, get to the reading part. And they're like, even if your kid is behind in reading, if they have something that really interests them, eventually they're going to be like, oh, if I'm going to go farther with this, then I have to learn how to read. And so it's a really interesting system because it puts more of it on the children, and sort of like that peer, you don't want to fall behind your peers. Like, you don't want to be the only one who's not finished with whatever it was supposed to be by the end of the year. And they do like a business fair. So it's a very like entrepreneurial minded school, but the founder started the first one here in Austin, and now they're all over the world. And she wrote a book as well. So I think if anybody is interested in something like that, like, still wants the school, then Acton is a good one to look into.
I like that self-guided type mode, because nobody learns anything that they don't want to learn. You can sit a kid down, but if you're throwing calculus at him and he just doesn't see any reason for it, he's not going to learn it. And exactly. It's the same thing your whole life is. You and I learn things all the time. We're always studying different copywriting, marketing, business, but it's because we have a reason to. We see we have a destination we want to get to, and educating yourself is the only way to get there. So right. I love that the school's helping them kind of choose their own journey, because they'll learn a lot better.
Yeah. And I think it respects it's very well known that some kids are going to read early. Like, my daughter is a very early reader. There are other kids that will not be interested or ready to do that until they're 7, 8 years old. I mean, in public school, it's like, well, you read in kindergarten or whatever, or you fail. Like, that's just how it is. Whereas an approach like that makes more allowances for, some kids are going to be ready to do it right away. Some kids are going to want to focus on something else and come back to the reading. I think I read that, like, in Finland, they don't start reading or they don't start school until like age 7 or 8. So far later than here. And meanwhile, we're putting like all this pressure on kids to do everything, in lockstep. Like, it has to be, you read at this level, at this age, and then this level, or you're falling behind, you're failing. Which is just, I don't know. I'm so into like evidence-based everything, and it drives me insane that it's like we have data on what works better. We have data on how kids learn. We have data on other school systems that are producing better results than ours. And like, why can't we just do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the institution of education seems to be captured by whatever special interest groups, probably the administrative state of it. And there's the teachers union. I know people don't like to talk about it, but it really does hold the school system back the way it's structured. And I'm not totally anti-union, but when a certain thing takes over and takes that much control over a system and doesn't let it evolve, I think you have to be able to rethink it.
Yeah. And I know, it's probably the same everywhere, but I know here in Texas, a lot of like our standardized testing and stuff, I mean, it's like political. Like, it was part of somebody's political campaign. They're not an educator. But this is what sounds good. This is what shows that they're doing something and they're going to get votes. And then they're like off, to the next thing. And meanwhile, this system is so messed up, and that's just what we're stuck with now. It's their incentives aren't really aligned with the children. It's aligned with getting votes. And it's a big problem in the whole system. So I kind of want to switch topics again. I don't know, Marcella Allison, right? Yes.
Yeah. So Marcella is a good friend of mine, and, she's a very successful copywriter and entrepreneur in her own right. And some of the times that I've sat down just over drinks with her and heard some of the stories about just being a woman in business, experiences that I never even imagined having. It's not that, women can't succeed, but there are certain challenges. Have you run into any of that, just being a woman in the business world?
Yeah. I mean, that's just being a woman in the world, period. Sure. But yeah, I mean, I think that there is definitely, in our industry, it's very male dominated. You run into that a lot, that, somebody is going to push back on your, like, whatever you're charging more than a man in many cases. I remember a Facebook, I won't name names, but a Facebook post that was like, oh, how come there aren't any good female copywriters? And so many of us, I mean, this was back when I'm not really on Facebook too much anymore, but there were so many of us that were like, we're all around. Like, so yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say about it in particular. I think it's not just this industry, it's like a business-wide thing. I remember all the times that I was told, it's just that women don't ask for raises. So I looked into, okay, well, what's the best way to ask for a raise? Oh, you show, what other people in similar positions are making, you show what you've done for the company, you present all of this stuff. And I would do all of that and it wouldn't make any difference. And so I was like, well, on an individual level, this is clearly not working. Yeah, I'm not really sure what to say about that. People like Marcella are definitely leaders in that aspect. She had her group and provided a lot of support for women, which I think is extremely important if you're a woman really in any industry, but in ours, to find those people that are championing women. Kevin Rogers is another one. He always, at his copy chief events, it's a pretty even balance of men and women. On his podcast, it's a very even balance, and he's very big into promoting women. So I think it's really key to have those allies because, it is different.
Yeah, one of the things I've hired Marcel a lot to I hire her as a copy chief on certain projects, especially if it's female facing, because you just have to have that other experience, and men and women do have very different experiences. And one of the things she talks about a lot is that projects usually go better when men and women work together, instead of you don't cut all the women out, you don't cut all the men out. It's, we actually do better when we each have different perspective and different experiences that we can bring to the project. So you kind of broaden your base out. But I have seen a lot of people trying harder to involve women. I know Justin Goff's done it. He's intentionally went out and looked for women speakers at his events. You mentioned Kevin does it. It's just, I think, a challenge that culturally we have to face is that, in this world where everybody's can be a contractor, you can't look at this whole, oh, well, she has to be a mom, so I can't hire her. And I think a lot of older guys still think, oh, she has a kid, she's not going to have time to focus on my business.
I almost did miss out on an opportunity because I was about to have a kid. And that was the reasoning, was that, she's about to have a kid, she's going to be occupied by that. So that's very, very much a thing. And I think to your point about, having both men and women together, I started kind of playing around with this idea of talking about the strengths that women bring to marketing and how to use those strengths and really leverage them in their work. It's really just kind of like a draft of a book sitting in a Google Doc right now. But the interest, the research that I did on it was really interesting, because I was finding things like, with interviewing, a lot of times people will open up more to a woman. Both women and men tend to open up more to a woman, especially if you're talking about something kind of embarrassing, or, if you're talking about, you were talking about erectile dysfunction or something like that. They tend to open up to a female interviewer more so than a male. And so it is one of those things, if you had both together and you kind of know this, well, then why not let, the woman, the female marketer, handle that aspect of it and see if you can't get better material to work with. It's super interesting.
Well, I just out of self-interest, half the world is women. And if you're not able to sell, there's a lot of guys who just write off women as customers. It's oh, well, in direct response, they don't buy financial products. They don't buy, health books. I'm yeah, they do, if you know how to talk to them. So it's out of pure financial self-interest. It would seem that men and women should start trying to work together a little bit harder.
Right. Yeah. And I can't, the statistic on this varies, but it's always 80 to 90% in different surveys I've seen. It's the women that are buying the majority of the things for the household. 80 to 90% of the purchasing decisions are made by a woman. And even for men's products, because they're buying it for their husbands, because he won't buy it for himself. Or how many women buy their husband's new socks? That's
right.
Yeah.
So it is interesting that people would overlook that segment of the market.
Right.
So you've had a pretty successful career up till now. What do you see as like your next steps? What is in the future, what does April want to have her career look like, say 5 years from now? If you could design and get everything you wanted, what would it be?
Yeah, so I would love to do consulting for companies that are advocating for social change, whether that's like environmental change, things like cleaning up the oceans, all of these things that I feel like most people can agree on, even in a very polarized society. I think we can agree on things like clean oceans. I would love to use my marketing for that sort of good in the world and that sort of change. Because I think as when you understand copywriting, that's a pretty powerful thing that you can do. So I'd like to try applying it to, this sort of other industry.
So do you see yourself doing that as a freelancing copywriter, or do you kind of see yourself starting a business in that area and promoting it that way?
So like I said, I like to work around my family schedule. So I feel like consulting is probably a better route for me than starting, say an agency or something like that. So I see it as more of a consulting type gig.
Okay.
Not writing all the copy, because let's be honest, like usually if you've been a copywriter, you're kind of over that at a certain point.
You definitely get over copywriting.
Consulting I still love.
Yes. All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.